Tyler, let's talk about a stock you and I both own. Over the long term, it's done pretty well from some of the prior cyclical lows. More recently, it's gotten hammered. And it's a business that kind of sits squarely in the middle of one of the things that the Trump administration is targeting, and that is renewable energy subsidies and incentives. The company we're talking about is First Solar here. You ready to dig into what's going on?
Yeah, there's actually a lot to unpack in this story.
Yeah, I want to be clear too. This is not going to be a political video at all. We're going to talk about the real things that are happening and potentially happening, talk about the risks and the opportunities and some of the things that have set First Solar apart. Before we get into the details though, I'm Jason Hall. This is Investing Unscripted. This video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. We got some great opportunities for you to we have a great opportunity for you to upskill yourself as an investor. Go to our special link. It's fool.com/unscripted. Go to that link and you can get access to the 10 best stocks to buy right now. Go check that out. So this is since the election. So I've got ENPH on here too, just for a little bit of color. First Solar is down 13%. ENPH is down a ton. I wanted to do that because one of the things we'll talk about is the difference between First Solar that really targets, their entire business is utility scale, and ENPH lives in the residential solar business. And there's some different things that are affecting both those companies. So with that said, let's talk about what's going on with First Solar that sent the stock down since the election. I think we can go back even further than that. It hasn't been a great year for the stock.
No, it's renewable energy in general. And basically anything that's been like heavy finance cost related has been hit hard. We've talked about a lot of other energy companies and renewable energy companies and anybody where like the cost of capital is a big deal that have been hit particularly hard. First Solar being one of them, of course, utility scale operations do require a significant amount of financing. And when the cost of debt goes way up, all of a sudden those deals that penciled a long time ago may not work as they do today.
Stock's down almost 40% from its peak this spring. And the higher for longer, like I said, with interest rates, that's definitely one of the things playing a role, but also concerns about incentives and other things that could be upending the business.
Yeah, there's tax credits and several other incentives that have been built into the renewable energy kind of mechanism in the United States, if you will, both from the Obama administration through the first Trump administration through the Biden administration. They've all changed in various ways. And it's interesting to see because despite all of this, First Solar has chugged along in its own sort of operating way. One thing that we have talked about with First Solar every time we talk about them is from an operation side, they're probably the best operator in this business in terms of being able to, produce when it needs to. It's very conservative on building out its production so it doesn't have to shutter facilities when the market goes sideways. Big cash positions on its balance sheet all the time. This is the company that's built to handle the stormy weathers, if you will, if we're going to get really punny here.
No, we'd have to go cloudy days, though. We'd have to go cloudy days.
Sure. Sorry. I wasn't pun enough. But
yeah,
just the idea that like First Solar acknowledges that despite it being a fast growing industry, it is a very cyclical industry and they have built their business accordingly. It looks a lot more like a mature industrial manufacturer than some like upstart willy-nilly solar panel manufacturer. We're going to grow to the moon.
I want to highlight, Tyler, I think it's worth talking about is their technical approach, the technology that they use, the thin film panels that they use. It's not silicon panels. It's not the best, most efficient technology that's out there, but what they have is something that's highly reliable, very predictable, and at a good cost. And for these utility scale projects, that's massively important that the installers know that across variable temperature and climate environments that can really affect other kinds of solar panels, they have a pretty high level of predictable output and the decline curve, because that's one thing with solar panels is the day that you install the panels, they're producing 100% of their nameplate capacity. They're at 100%. And then over the life of the panels, it's going to decline by percentage points. The thin film panels hold up really well. So that predictability is really valuable to First Solar's customers. And because they specialize in utility scale, they're predictable in themselves, right? Customers know what they're going to get with them. And that's valuable with these very highly risk averse customers that need to know what they're going to get out of their investment.
Yeah. And not to get, I don't want to get too opinionated on the political side, but if we talk about the manufacturing capacity of First Solar, like you said, it's a thin film. It doesn't use silicone. It's a thing called cadmium telluride. And as a result, it's not as reliant on the silicon supply chain, which happens to be dominated by China. And if we're looking at a Trump administration and going on its previous efforts in its first administration, where there were broad-based tariffs on Chinese manufactured goods, especially in the solar panel industry, First Solar was largely insulated from that because of the panels that they make. They have pretty large domestic footprint here in the United States. And because of the way that it's manufactured, it actually was exempt from tariffs. So a lot of even its imported stuff didn't hit as hard as it had with some of the other panel makers who are based largely on silicone and have a lot of overseas operations for production.
Yeah, that domestic capacity is growing. Something they mentioned in their third quarter is their facility that they have in Alabama opened, and they have an expansion to their facility in Louisiana, they say is on schedule. So that's a real positive from the perspective of if we do see the Trump administration come in and be a little bit more protectionist with policies around tariffs specifically. First Solar, like you said, is a company that I don't want to say that the tariffs would necessarily be a tailwind, because the industry is, again, it's in a bit of contraction right now, but it could help net out and help it be a little stronger when its competitors are at more of a disadvantage. So certainly something that could be positive. And like you said, I think the bigger things on the supply chain side, having less exposure to China, specifically in Asia broadly, it could certainly have some positive implications for the business.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to be a headwind. I don't want to paint it as, hey, First Solar is going to just absolutely do awesome. But if you look at a couple things, it's backlog. It has very large backlog. It's going to take years for it to even produce its current backlog, even if it got no new orders. So there's a lot of cushion built into there. It's growing its international presence. It's building some facilities in India, and Indian power producers are becoming major customers. So they're actually starting to get some international diversification in their order book, such to the point where if we were to see some more like tariff issues, maybe some of those originally destined for North America panels can start to be pushed into international markets a little bit more. There are ways that these things can happen. I think one of the hard things, and this is a broad investment lesson when it comes to changing political administrations, government regulations, businesses figure things out. Like, the whole job of the business isn't to like, oh, something happened and we're destroyed. Most businesses are going to try to operate in a way to be profitable in the environment that they're in. Like, management makes those sort of changes. I think that based on First Solar's history of good operations, that's the same thing here. It's maybe a more challenging environment, but management will probably be one of the ones that can adapt to that environment.
Yeah, I think that's a big key, because we've seen First Solar's management do exactly that over the past decade plus. They have certainly, in the panel manufacturing business, they've been the best at navigating the ups and downs. And it starts by having, again, a technology that's reliable, predictable, that they're really good at making, and then capital allocation decisions, managing their balance sheet, making sure that it's a strength when the industry's weakest, so they can continue to invest in their business across the cycle, and also making smart decisions about when they do allocate capital towards expansion, new products, and they have to spend a bunch of capital to shift to retool for that new product. They've been really smart about their timing with that, to not put themselves in a position where they've spent all their capital for growth or new products that times right when the cycle turns and demand goes down. They've been really smart about making the right decisions at the right time that has paid off really well for investors. Here's my question for you. We've seen the stock, it's down almost 40% from the 52-week high at this point. They have that super strong backlog that you've talked about, but there are real risks that the downturn that we've seen in residential that's carried over to utility scale because of those capital costs. If interest rates stay higher, if a new administration comes in and does do things that maybe protract the downturn, are you thinking about First Solar? How are you thinking about it as an investment right now, whether you own shares or you're looking at it as a stock you might want to think about buying?
It is a stock I've owned for a long time, and I have opportunity added to that position in tough times. I think there is a window opening here. I've been looking elsewhere in the industry because for a while there, First Solar was actually priced quite high. I started going to some of the other cheaper options. Canadian Solar is one that I also own. It's a smaller position. But with a more challenging operating environment coming, I can see this being a window where I don't know if I'm going to do it tomorrow, but I'm going to certainly be watching over the next couple of quarters or so to be maybe adding to my current position.